Just hold still." The voice was a crystalline chime scraped over gravel, echoing slightly in the cramped metal space. Kalen's head throbbed in time with the flashing emergency lights. He tried to wrench his arm free, but the grip holding his wrist was deceptively strong, slender fingers tipped with something sharp digging into his skin just shy of drawing blood. Again. He blinked, trying to clear the spots from his vision. She loomed over him, a silhouette against the sparks showering from a ruptured console. Tall, impossibly thin, contours outlined by a faint, internal light that pulsed in shifting patterns across skin that looked like polished obsidian overlaid with constellations. Tendrils, fine as spun glass and tipped with the same faint luminescence, writhed around her head like a disturbed halo. "Get off me," Kalen grunted, yanking again. Metal screamed somewhere deeper in the wreckage of his scout ship, the Nomad. Their crash landing on this jungle moon had been less landing, more controlled plummet. "You are injured," she stated, her voice losing the gravelly edge, smoothing into something hypnotic. One of the tendrils drifted down, brushing against the gash on his forehead he hadn't even realized was bleeding freely. He flinched back. "Yeah, well, crashing tends to do that, especially when your passenger decides mid-descent is a great time to wrestle for the controls." He glared up at her. Her eyes were huge, solid pools of silver, reflecting the emergency lights like captured moons. No pupils he could see. "The vector was suboptimal," she replied calmly, completely ignoring his accusation. Her attention wasn't on his face, but on the blood trickling down his temple. Her own strange inner light seemed to brighten, the patterns swirling faster, shifting from cool blues and greens to warmer golds and reds, particularly around her mouth and the tips of those questing tendrils. He remembered the fight just before the crash, the intruders on his ship, her sudden appearance from the salvaged cryopod he'd foolishly picked up, the brutal balletic way she'd moved, dispatching them with flashes of energy from her hands. He'd been hit, a plasma score across his chest, searing pain. She pulled him towards the escape hatch, yelling something in her alien tongue. He remembered stumbling, his bleeding hand brushing against her mouth as he fell forward. Had she? He hadn't seen her ingest anything, but the way she was looking at his blood now. "Suboptimal, we hit a tree," Kalen snapped, trying to push himself up. Pain flared along his ribs and he hissed. "Look, whatever you are, Queen Highness Fancy Pants from the mystery pod, we need to get out of this wreck before the fuel cells cook off." Her silver eyes finally flicked up to meet his. A flicker of something unreadable crossed her features. "This vessel's integrity is compromised." Agreed. Her grip on his wrist didn't loosen. Instead, her other hand came up, fingers tracing the line of blood dripping towards his jaw. He jerked his head away, heart hammering against his bruised ribs. "Don't touch me." "Your metabolic cascade is agitated," she murmured, her gaze drifting back to the wound. The tendrils near her mouth quivered. "The scent potent." "Yeah, it's called adrenaline, fear. You know, the normal reaction to almost dying." He tried sarcasm, his usual shield, but his voice shook slightly. Her proximity was overwhelming. She smelled like ozone and something else, something metallic and sweet that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Her inner light cast shifting shadows across the ruined cockpit, making her angles seem sharper, more predatory. "Fear," she repeated, tilting her head. The tendrils swayed. "A familiar resonance, but this is different." Her fingers, cool and smooth despite their strength, brushed his cheek again, near the cut. He couldn't pull away this time, pinned by the wreckage and her unnerving focus. Her thumb swept across the edge of the gash, coming away smeared with red. Kalen's breath hitched. She brought her thumb towards her face, those silver eyes fixed on his. The light within her flared, turning a deep, pulsing crimson. Her lips parted slightly. He could see the edge of sharp, pearlescent teeth. This wasn't curiosity. This was hunger. "What are you doing?" he whispered, the cramped space suddenly feeling suffocating. Her tongue, surprisingly pink against the obsidian skin, darted out, touching the bead of blood on her thumb. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The crimson light pulsed violently, then softened, swirling with gold. A low sound vibrated in her chest, not quite a purr, not quite a groan. It resonated through the deck plating beneath him, unsettling him on a primal level. Ah, she breathed, the sound filled with a terrifying mix of discovery and satisfaction. Her grip on his wrist tightened, the sharp tips pressing down. Optimal. Before Kalen could react, alarms blared louder, a proximity alert cutting through the haze of pain and disbelief. Red lights strobed insistently. Something was approaching outside, fast. Her head snapped up, the predatory focus instantly shifting outwards. The crimson glow faded, replaced by sharp, alert blues. "They have found us," she said, her voice tight. She released his wrist, finally. "We must leave, now." She moved towards the buckled hatch, her movements fluid and urgent. But as she reached it, she paused, glancing back at him, her silver eyes lingering for a second too long on the blood still trickling down his face. The brief, intense look held a terrifying promise. He wasn't just cargo anymore. He was something else entirely, and whatever it was, it scared him more than the approaching threat outside. The jungle air hit him like a physical blow, thick, humid, choked with the scent of alien pollen and decay. Lyravania moved through the dense undergrowth with unnerving silence, her glowing form somehow blending with the dappled bioluminescence of the native flora. Kalen stumbled after her, clutching his side, the plasma score throbbing relentlessly. His cheap envirosuit was torn, offering little protection against grasping vines and needle-sharp thorns. Every ragged breath tasted like moss and imminent doom. "Slow down," he hissed, tripping over a root hidden beneath giant, pulsating fungi. He caught himself on a low-hanging branch dripping viscous sap. She paused, turning back. Her internal light had dimmed to a soft, ambient blue-green, making her harder to track but no less imposing. The tendrils around her head shifted, testing the air. "They are close." Scanners detected the ship's energy signature upon atmospheric entry. Standard pursuit protocol. "Standard? Who the hell are they?" Kalen demanded, wiping sweat and grime from his brow with a shaky hand. His gaze inadvertently flickered to the dried smear of blood near her mouth. She hadn't wiped it off. "Irrelevant," she replied dismissively. "They hunt me. Your involvement was unplanned." Her silver eyes met his, and for a moment the predatory glint returned, sharp and unsettling, though not entirely unwelcome now. "Unwelcome," he gaped at her. "Lady, I picked up your escape pod thinking it was high-grade salvage. I get shot, crash my ship, and now I'm running for my life from your personal stalkers, and you think this is not unwelcome?" A flicker of amusement, maybe, hard to tell with the alien features and the shifting light. "Your contribution has altered the tactical parameters." She gestured vaguely towards her mouth, then seemed to think better of it. "Your unique biosignature is resonant." "Resonant? What does that even mean?" He pushed himself upright, ignoring the protest from his ribs. "And what was that back there, with my blood?" She turned away, resuming her swift pace. "Later, survival first." He cursed under his breath, forcing his aching legs to move faster. The jungle was alive around them, buzzing, clicking, rustling. Giant insects with jeweled carapaces skittered across glowing vines. Strange, bird-like creatures with leathery wings swooped through the canopy gaps, their cries echoing eerily. It was beautiful in a terrifying, everything wants to eat you kind of way. Lyravania seemed utterly unfazed, moving like she belonged here. Maybe she did. What was she? They reached a ridge overlooking a deep ravine shrouded in mist. Water roared somewhere below. Lyravania stopped, scanning the area. Her tendrils pulsed rhythmically. "They are attempting to flank us," she murmured, "using aerial reconnaissance." Kalen squinted into the dense canopy behind them. He couldn't see anything, but he felt it, a prickle of unease, the sense of being watched. "So, what's the plan, Your Highness? Got any more tricks like that energy blast thing?" "My energy reserves are depleted," she said, her voice flat. "The crash, the adaptation, it required significant resources." She glanced at him again, her gaze lingering on his still bleeding forehead. The light within her flickered with that disturbing crimson hue again, just for a second. Adaptation? What adaptation? He opened his mouth to ask, but she spoke first. There, a cave system. She pointed across the ravine to a dark fissure in the cliff face opposite, partially hidden by hanging creepers. We can lose them in the tunnels. Great caves, probably full of giant spiders or worse, Kalen grumbled, but he knew it was their best option. How do we get across? The ravine was easily 50 meters wide, the drop lost in shadow. Lyravanya didn't answer verbally. She moved to the edge, her scaled skin shimmering. She braced herself, then leaped. Kalen choked back a yell as she soared across the chasm, seemingly defying gravity for an impossible moment before landing silently on the opposite ledge. She turned, her form a beacon of soft light against the dark rock. She beckoned him. "Are you kidding me?" he yelled across the gap, the roar of the waterfall below swallowing half his words. "I can't do that." She tilted her head. "Your species lacks inherent kinetic projection." "We lack not dying from 50-meter falls," he shouted back, exasperated. "We have things like bones that break." She considered this for a moment, her tendrils twitching. Then she took a step back onto the ledge, raised her hands, and a thin, shimmering filament of light shot from her palms, anchoring itself to a sturdy-looking rock formation near Kalen. It solidified into a narrow, translucent bridge barely wider than his boot. It hummed faintly with energy. "Cross," she commanded, her voice echoing slightly, quickly. Kalen stared at the glowing energy bridge, then at the drop below, then back at the impossible alien woman waiting for him. His survival instincts screamed at him to run the other way, but behind him, the sounds of pursuit were growing louder, the snap of branches, the low thrum of unfamiliar engines. He took a deep breath, tasting ozone from the energy bridge. His life had officially jumped the rails into utter insanity. Swallowing hard, he stepped onto the humming filament of light. It felt strangely solid beneath his boot, yet vibrated with contained power. He didn't look down. He focused only on Lyravanya, her silver eyes tracking his progress, her internal light a steady, guiding presence in the encroaching dusk. She hadn't just saved him, she'd tethered him to her, quite literally. And as he shuffled across the terrifying gap, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real danger wasn't the hunters behind him or the fall below, but the enigmatic alien waiting for him on the other side, the one who tasted his blood and called it optimal. The energy bridge dissolved the instant Kalen stumbled onto the solid rock of the far ledge, pitching him forward. Lyravanya caught him easily, her grip firm on his arm. For a dizzying second, he was pressed against her side. Her skin felt cool beneath the thin fabric of her bodysuit, but underneath, he could feel a strange heat, a thrumming energy that resonated against his own skin. The metallic sweet scent was stronger now, making his head spin. Her tendrils brushed against his neck, sending involuntary shivers down his spine. "Careful, human," she murmured, her voice close to his ear. The crimson light flickered deep within her obsidian skin again, triggered by the contact. "Your balance is compromised." He pushed himself away awkwardly, cheeks flushing despite the danger. "Yeah, well, maybe don't dissolve the only thing keeping me from becoming paste on the rocks below." She ignored his sarcasm, already turning towards the cave entrance. "The tunnel network is extensive according to planetary geological surveys accessed from your ship's limited database before the crash. It should provide adequate cover." She slipped into the darkness without hesitation. Kalen stared after her, then glanced back across the ravine. He thought he saw movement in the trees on the other side, fleeting shadows against the twilight gloom. He shivered, not entirely from the cool air rising from the chasm. Swallowing his apprehension, he ducked into the cave after Lyravanya. The air inside was damp and cold, smelling of wet stone and something earthy, almost metallic. It was pitch black beyond the entrance. "Hey, wait up, I can't see a thing," he called out. A soft glow ignited ahead of him. Lyravanya had increased her internal luminescence, casting the narrow passage in an ethereal blue light. The walls were slick with moisture, carved with strange, swirling patterns that looked almost too regular to be natural. Water dripped somewhere deeper in, the sound echoing in the confined space. "Stay close," she ordered, her voice sounding flatter, tighter than before. "And try not to bleed further. The scent signature could compromise our position." "Right, because that's my priority right now," Kalen muttered, carefully picking his way over the uneven rock floor. He touched his forehead gingerly. The bleeding had mostly stopped, forming a crust. He glanced at Lyravanya's profile. Her jaw seemed clenched, the lines of her body taut with tension. Was she just focused on escape, or was something else bothering her, that adaptation she'd mentioned? They moved deeper into the earth, the passage twisting and turning. Sometimes it opened into small chambers filled with glistening stalactites. Other times it narrowed so much they had to turn sideways. Lyravanya navigated the labyrinth with an eerie certainty, occasionally pausing, head tilted, tendrils quivering as if listening to something Kalen couldn't hear. "How do you know where you're going?" he finally asked, breaking the silence. "Resonance," she replied curtly. "The rock strata possess harmonic frequencies. I follow the pathways of least geological resistance." "Right, rock resonance. Of course." He shook his head. Talking to her was like talking to a sentient physics equation, except this equation looked like a supermodel from a Giger painting and had a worrying fixation on his bodily fluids. They emerged into a larger cavern. A subterranean stream gurgled through it, pooling in the center before disappearing into another dark tunnel. Strange, phosphorescent crystals studded the ceiling, casting milky, shifting patterns on the water's surface. It was beautiful, but the enclosed space felt oppressive. Lyravanya stopped by the pool, kneeling gracefully to scoop water into her cupped hands. She drank deeply, the blue light along her throat pulsing rhythmically. Kalen approached cautiously, his throat dry. "Is it safe?" She glanced up, droplets clinging to her chin, catching the light like tiny diamonds. "Mineral content is high but non-toxic to my physiology. Yours, I cannot be certain." She dipped her hand again, holding it out to him, water pooling in her palm. "A minimal amount should not harm you." He hesitated. Drinking from her hand felt intimate, too intimate. But he was desperately thirsty. He knelt beside her, leaning forward to sip the cool water. His fingers brushed hers as he steadied himself. A jolt, like static electricity but deeper, shot up his arm. Lyravanya gasped softly, pulling her hand back as if burned. The light within her flared erratically, shifting through a chaotic spectrum of colors: blue, green, gold, flashing crimson, then back to blue. Her tendrils writhed. "What was that?" Kalen asked, startled. She stared at her hand, then at him, her silver eyes wide with something that looked like alarm mixed with curiosity. "Bioelectric feedback," she managed, her voice strained. "Your field, it interacts strongly with mine." She clenched her fist, the light stabilizing back to a nervous blue. "Unexpected." "Everything about this situation is unexpected," Kalen muttered, wiping his mouth. He studied her. She seemed genuinely rattled by the contact. Maybe the resonant thing wasn't just technobabble. Maybe they were affecting each other in ways neither of them understood. The thought was both intriguing and deeply unsettling. She was avoiding his gaze now, focusing intently on the patterns the crystals made on the far wall. The tension that had been simmering between them since the crash suddenly felt sharper, more personal. It wasn't just about hunters and survival anymore. It was about the spark that had just jumped between them in the dark, damp cave, a spark ignited by nothing more than a shared drink of water. And Kalen had a sinking feeling that, like the crash and the blood incident, this too was only the beginning. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and the drip of water. Lyravanya remained kneeling by the pool, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed on the cavern wall. The blue light emanating from her seemed cooler now, almost brittle. Kalen shifted uncomfortably, the damp chill of the cave seeping into his bones. "So," he began, trying to sound casual, "about this adaptation you mentioned, and the you know." He gestured vaguely towards his forehead, then her mouth. She finally looked at him, her silver eyes unreadable. My species, the Cathar, maintain metabolic equilibrium through resonant energy absorption, ambient fields, stellar radiation, biosignatures of compatible life forms. She paused, her gaze flicking down to his hand, the one that had brushed hers. Your blood, it contains complex proteins and bioelectrical frequencies previously uncatalogued by my assimilation matrix. Assimilation matrix, Kalen echoed, frowning. You mean when you tasted it? A faint flush of deeper blue pulsed across her cheekbones. During the conflict aboard your vessel, your injury bled freely. In the chaos of securing the escape vector, she hesitated, the regal composure faltering for a fraction of a second. There was inadvertent contact, ingestion. Inadvertent, Kalen repeated flatly. He remembered the fall, his hand flailing. It was plausible, barely. And she continued, her voice regaining its measured tone. Your specific biochemistry triggered a cascade reaction within my system. A forced, symbiotic integration. My physiology now recognizes your biosignature as a necessary component for equilibrium. Kalen stared at her. Wait, are you saying you need my blood now, like to live? The crimson light flickered again, faint but undeniable. The integration is aggressive. Without periodic reinforcement from the source signature, your blood, my systems will destabilize, rapidly. He felt a cold dread wash over him, colder than the cave air. Destabilize how? Cellular cohesion failure, uncontrolled energy discharge, pain. Her voice was stark, devoid of emotion, but her tendrils twitched violently. Ultimately, systemic collapse. Kalen leaned back against the damp cave wall, trying to process this. He was a walking life support system for an alien queen who'd accidentally turned herself into some kind of vampire. A very specific Kalen-flavored vampire. So, the hunters, they know about this. Unlikely. This reaction is unique, aberrant. They hunt me for my lineage, the potential power I represent within the fractured Cathar echelons. She rose gracefully to her feet, turning away from the pool. This vulnerability, it cannot be known. Right, Kalen said slowly, because that would make you an easy target. He pushed himself off the wall. Okay. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to think past the sheer insanity. So, how periodic is periodic reinforcement? Lyra Vanya didn't answer immediately. She walked towards the narrow tunnel leading out of the cavern, her light dimming slightly. The initial stabilization utilized the trace amount ingested. My reserves are currently adequate. Her voice was strained again. But the requirement interval will shorten as the resonance deepens. Deepens? How does it deepen? She paused at the tunnel mouth, glancing back at him over her shoulder. The blue light caught the sharp angle of her cheekbone, the curve of her lips. Proximity, she said softly. Bioelectric exchange. Contact. His mind flashed back to the jolt when their hands brushed. The way her light flared. Contact. Oh, this was bad. This was monumentally, apocalyptically bad. He was stranded on a hostile moon with a gorgeous, deadly alien who literally needed his blood to survive, and apparently just being near her was making the situation worse. Or better, depending on which twisted definition of better one subscribed to. So staying close to you makes you need me more, he asked, his voice tight. It strengthens the symbiotic matrix, she corrected, though it sounded like semantics to him. It makes the integration more efficient. Efficient, he echoed numbly. He scrubbed a hand over his face. Survival first, she'd said. But survival now seemed inextricably linked to this bizarre, terrifying dependency. His freedom, his autonomy, suddenly felt very fragile. He looked at her standing there, bathed in her own cool light, regal even in exile, powerful yet terrifyingly vulnerable. And despite the fear, despite the utter absurdity, a strange, unwelcome flicker of something else sparked within him. Curiosity, maybe. Protective instinct, ridiculous attraction, absolutely insane. All right, he said, forcing a semblance of control into his voice. All right, let's just keep moving, find somewhere safer than a damp cave. He started towards the tunnel, needing action, needing to outrun the implications swirling in his head. As he passed her, he deliberately kept his distance, acutely aware of the space between them, the invisible current that now flowed from him to her. He felt her silver eyes on his back, felt the subtle shift in her internal light as he moved away. The resonance, he thought grimly. She could probably feel it too. This wasn't just her problem anymore. It was theirs. And the thought sent another jolt through him, one that had nothing to do with bioelectricity and everything to do with the terrifying pull of connection. The cave system eventually opened onto a high ledge concealed behind a curtain of phosphorescent vines. Below them stretched a vast, mist-shrouded swamp, dotted with colossal mangrove-like trees whose roots glowed with the same soft light as the native fungi. The air was thick with the chirr of unseen insects and the distant bellow of some large creature. Dawn was breaking, painting the misty sky in hues of violet and sickly orange. "We need supplies," Kalen stated, surveying the alien landscape. "Water, food, maybe something to patch up my suit and this hole in my head." He touched his forehead gingerly. The bleeding had stopped, but it throbbed dully. "My ship's emergency kit went up with the rest of it." Lyravania scanned the swamp, her tendrils extending slightly, tasting the air. "The vegetation here is rich in complex carbohydrates. Some fauna possess nutrient-dense muscle tissue. Water purification will be necessary." Her gaze swept back to him, lingering for a moment on his face. The blue light within her seemed steady, but there was a tightness around her eyes, a subtle tension in her stance that hadn't been there before the cave. The adaptation was clearly weighing on her. "Right, forage for alien bugs and glowing space cabbage. Sounds delightful," Kalen muttered. "Lead the way, Queenie, just try not to get us eaten." She gave him a look that might have been annoyance, but it was hard to tell. "My designation is Lyravania." "Kalen," he offered grudgingly. "And I'm not exactly thrilled about being your personal juice box, Lyravania." The light around her flared briefly, washing her features in gold before settling back to blue. "The situation is regrettable, but necessary for my survival." "Yeah, your survival," he shot back. "What about mine? Those hunters aren't just going to give up because we played hide-and-seek in a cave." "They will track my energy signature," she admitted. "But distance and the dense biofield of this region will impede them. We have time to replenish resources, time to stabilize." The last word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Stabilize her, with him. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Arguing was pointless. They were stuck together, bound by circumstance and her bizarre biological imperative. "Fine. Let's go find your nutrient-dense muscle tissue. But if anything jumps out with more than 4 legs and teeth, I'm using you as a shield." A corner of her mouth twitched. It might have been the alien equivalent of a smile. "Your mass is insufficient for effective shielding, Kalen." He blinked. Was that a joke from the deadly serious alien queen? Ha ha, very funny. He started picking his way down the slippery path leading from the ledge towards the swamp floor. The swamp was even more surreal up close. Giant, luminous lily pads floated on stagnant pools of black water. Vines thick as his arms snaked between the glowing mangrove roots. The air hummed with unseen life. Lyravania moved with confidence, identifying edible-looking fungi and strange, bulbous fruits Kalen wouldn't have touched with a 10-meter pole. She gathered them efficiently, tucking them into a makeshift pouch fashioned from broad leaves. Kalen focused on finding a clean water source, eventually locating a small spring bubbling up between moss-covered rocks. While Lyravania continued foraging nearby, he used the small, battered multi-tool he always kept clipped to his belt to test the water. Mostly potable, just needed a quick purification cycle with the tool's integrated filter. He filled his canteen, then hesitated. Should he offer her some? The memory of the cave, the jolt of contact, made him wary. He looked over at her. She was examining a cluster of iridescent beetles crawling on a rotting log. Her focus was intense, her tendrils moving delicately over the insects, but he saw her hand tremble slightly as she reached out. He saw the faint, almost subliminal flicker of crimson deep within her light. The need was growing. He could feel it like a change in atmospheric pressure. How long did she have? Hours. A day. She suddenly looked up, catching him watching her. Her silver eyes met his across the small clearing. The air crackled with unspoken tension. The sounds of the swamp seemed to fade, leaving only the thrumming silence between them. Her gaze dropped to his neck, where his pulse beat steadily beneath the torn collar of his suit. He swallowed hard, instinctively raising a hand to cover the spot. Her lips parted slightly. "Kalen," she began, her voice low and husky, different from her usual precise tones. "Don't," he said quickly, holding up a hand. "Don't ask, not yet." Her expression tightened. The crimson flicker intensified, swirling with the blue like a turbulent nebula. The resonance, it calls for equilibrium. "Yeah, well, my survival instinct calls for not getting drained like a Capri Sun," he retorted, trying to inject humor he didn't feel. "We need a plan, something sustainable, something that doesn't involve you tackling me every time you get peckish." She straightened up, abandoning the Beatles. "Sustainable," she repeated, tilting her head. The analytical part of her seemed to reassert control, overlaying the raw need. Perhaps a controlled transfer, minimal volume, administered clinically. Clinically, he pictured her producing sterile needles from somewhere. The image was absurd. "Look, maybe there's another way. You said your people absorb energy from ambient fields, right? This place is buzzing with weird energy. Can't you just suck it out of the glowing mushrooms or something?" Lyravania shook her head slowly, the tendrils drifting listlessly. "The required frequencies are specific, complex biosignatures. Nothing in this environment matches the harmonic profile initiated by your blood." She took a step towards him, her movements fluid and deliberate. "Only the source signature can complete the resonance pattern now." He backed up instinctively, bumping against a mangrove root. Trapped. Again. She stopped a few feet away, her silver eyes locked on his, filled with a mixture of regal command and something that looked disturbingly like desperation. The air thickened, heavy with her need, with his fear, with the undeniable, terrifying current flowing between them. Survival, stabilization, contact. The words echoed in his mind. He looked at her trembling hand, the chaotic light swirling beneath her skin, the undeniable signs of her deteriorating condition. He thought about the hunters, somewhere out there, closing in. They needed each other to survive in more ways than one. But the price, he wasn't ready to pay it. Not yet. Lyravania took another slow step closer. Her scent, ozone, and that sweet metallic tang intensified, clouding his thoughts. The crimson within her light was becoming dominant, swirling like a captured storm. Her breathing grew shallow, audible in the humid air. He could see the tension in her jaw, the slight tremor in her hands clenched at her sides. The adequate reserves were clearly dwindling fast. "Kalen," she whispered, the sound rough, strained. "It is becoming difficult to maintain control." "Control of what?" he asked warily, though he suspected he knew the answer. His own heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the swamp's low hum. "The integration imperative," she gasped, pressing a hand to her temple where the tendrils converged. They writhed more violently now, glowing with erratic pulses of red light. "It overrides protocols, reason." Her silver eyes glazed over for a moment, unfocused, before snapping back to him, sharp and predatory. "The need, it burns." He swallowed hard, looking for an escape route, but the dense mangrove roots hemmed him in. She was between him and the open swamp. Okay, easy," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, authoritative, like talking down a spooked animal, a very large, glowing, potentially lethal alien animal. "Just breathe. Focus on that rock resonance thing." A humorless sound, almost a sob, escaped her. "The only resonance I feel is you." She swayed slightly, catching herself on a hanging vine. The vine sizzled faintly where her skin touched it. The proximity amplifies it. Panic clawed at Kalen's throat. This was escalating too quickly. Periodic reinforcement was starting to sound like any second now. Look, Lyravania, hurting me isn't going to help either of us. We need to think. Thinking requires equilibrium, she gritted out, taking another unsteady step. She was close now, close enough he could feel the heat radiating from her, see the fine, iridescent scales shimmering on her skin, the sharp points of her teeth visible between parted lips. The predator was surfacing, overriding the queen. Desperate, Kalen fumbled for the multi-tool clipped to his belt. It wasn't a weapon, not really, but it was solid metal. Maybe he could distract her, push her back. She saw the movement, her eyes narrowed. With a speed that blurred, she lunged, not at his neck as he'd feared, but at the tool in his hand. Her fingers, unnaturally strong, clamped around his wrist, twisting. Pain shot up his arm. The multi-tool clattered to the mossy ground. "No," she snarled, the sound guttural, alien. Her other hand shot out, pinning his shoulder against the mangrove root. He struggled, but she was immensely powerful, fueled by desperation. Her face was inches from his, her silver eyes burning now, the crimson light swirling within them like molten cores. He could feel the vibrations thrumming through her body, a low, dangerous hum. "Get off me," he yelled, trying to push her away, but it was like trying to move solid rock. Her tendrils brushed against his face, sending sparks of that weird bioelectric energy across his skin. It wasn't painful, but it was intensely distracting, overwhelming his senses. "Just a little," she pleaded, her voice a ragged whisper against his ear. The regal alien was gone, replaced by pure primal need. Just enough to stabilize. Her gaze dropped to the crook of his elbow, where his pulse jumped visibly beneath the thin fabric of his suit. His mind raced. If he fought her, she might lose control completely, hurt him badly. If he let her, what would happen? How much was a little? Could she even stop herself once she started? He remembered the look on her face in the cockpit, the sheer hunger. But then he saw the tear that escaped her eye, tracing a silver path down her obsidian cheek. It wasn't predatory calculation in her eyes now, but agony. The fight against her own biology, against the need clawing at her from the inside. She was trapped too. "Damn it," he breathed, the fight going out of him. He couldn't fight her, not when she looked like that, and maybe this was the only way, a controlled burn instead of an explosion. "Okay," he said, his voice hoarse. "Okay, just be careful." He stopped struggling, letting his arm go slack in her grip. He tilted his head back against the rough bark of the root, exposing his neck. A gesture of surrender, of trust. He wasn't sure what it was, only that it felt terrifyingly necessary. Lyravania froze, her burning eyes widening slightly. The crimson storm within them calmed, just a fraction. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by something else, confusion. Gratitude. She stared at his exposed neck, at the frantic pulse just beneath the skin. Her breathing was still ragged, her body trembling. The hand pinning his shoulder loosened slightly, fingers tracing the line of his collarbone almost gently. The moment stretched, thick with anticipation and fear. The sounds of the swamp rushed back in, the churring insects, the distant bellow, the gurgle of black water. Then slowly, deliberately, Lyravania lowered her head, not towards his neck but towards the inside of his wrist, still clamped in her grip. Her tendrils brushed softly against his skin, sending shivers down his spine. He closed his eyes, bracing himself. This wasn't sex, wasn't violence, but it felt like a violation nonetheless, an intimacy forced by biology and desperation. He felt the sharp prick of her teeth against his skin, felt a jolt of pure, undiluted alien need transfer through the contact, and then a sudden, dizzying rush as the transfer began. The sensation was unlike anything Kalen had ever experienced. It wasn't just the physical sting where her sharp teeth pierced the skin of his wrist, surprisingly shallow, more like surgical incisions than a bite. It was the pull. A strange, internal tugging, like a thread being drawn from the very core of him, flowing out through the point of contact. It didn't hurt, not exactly, but it made him feel lightheaded, disconnected. He could feel his heart rate stutter, then pick up speed, trying to compensate. Beside his ear, Lyravania made a low sound, a deep sigh that vibrated against his shoulder. The frantic energy thrumming through her body began to smooth out. The chaotic crimson light swirling beneath her skin coalesced, brightening into a steady, intense ruby glow that pulsed in time with his own heartbeat. Her grip on his wrist softened, her other hand sliding from his shoulder to rest almost gently against his chest, right over his heart. He could feel the subtle vibration of her resonance through her palm, a low hum that seemed to sink into his bones. He risked opening his eyes. Her face was still close, eyes closed now, long dark lashes stark against her glowing cheekbones. An expression of profound relief, almost ecstasy, smoothed the harsh lines of tension from her features. The tendrils around her head swayed gently, emitting soft pulses of ruby light. She looked serene, peaceful, utterly terrifying in her alienness, yet strangely vulnerable in this moment of intense need and release. He could feel himself weakening, the dizziness increasing. "Hey," he managed, his voice thin. "How much is a little?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing silver irises now shot through with threads of ruby light. They focused on him, clear and lucid again, the predatory glaze gone. "Almost there," she murmured, her voice thick, resonant. She shifted slightly, her lips moving against his wrist. The pulling sensation intensified for a heartbeat, then abruptly ceased. She lifted her head, licking a single drop of blood from her lips. Her own inner light pulsed brightly, a healthy, vibrant ruby that slowly softened, blending back towards her usual blues and greens, but richer now, deeper. She looked replenished, vital. The tightness around her eyes was gone, the tremor in her hands stilled. Equilibrium restored, she breathed, her voice regaining its normal crystalline chime, though laced with a new warmth. She released his wrist, her gaze dropping to the two small puncture marks welling with blood. Before he could react, she gently pressed the pads of her fingers against the wounds. A cool, tingling sensation spread from the contact points, and when she lifted her hand, the bleeding had stopped completely, leaving only two tiny red dots on his skin. Cathar first aid, apparently. Kalen stared at his wrist, then back at her. The intensity of the moment left him shaken, his limbs feeling heavy, his mind hazy. Lyravania still stood close, her hand lingering on his chest. Her silver eyes held his, and the usual regal distance was gone, replaced by something raw, unguarded. Gratitude, yes, but something more complex too. Awareness. Connection. "Thank you, Kalen," she said softly, the words carrying an unexpected weight. "You prevented a loss of control. You offered trust." He swallowed, his throat dry. "Didn't seem like we had much choice," he muttered, though it wasn't entirely true. He could have kept fighting. He chose not to. He looked away, uncomfortable with the sudden intimacy, the vulnerability hanging between them. "So, you feel better?" "I feel stable." She withdrew her hand from his chest, and he felt the loss of contact like a sudden chill. The vibrant glow of her light settled into a calmer, more complex pattern of blues, greens, and faint underlying ruby swirls. "The symbiotic matrix is temporarily sated." "Temporarily," he echoed, rubbing his wrist. He felt drained but strangely okay. Not violated exactly, more like involved, deeply, irrevocably involved. "How long does temporarily last?" She tilted her head, considering. Based on the volume transferred and the current resonant frequency, perhaps 2 standard rotations. Maybe 3, she paused. The interval will likely shorten with each subsequent transfer. 2 or 3 days. Then they'd have to do this again, and again, each time strengthening the bond, increasing the need, deepening the resonance she spoke of. Kalen leaned his head back against the mangrove root, closing his eyes. This was his life now. Bound to an alien queen by blood and bioelectricity, hunted across a hostile swamp world. He should be terrified. He should be looking for the first opportunity to run. But as he felt the lingering warmth where her hand had rested on his chest, the faint echo of her resonant hum in his bones, all he felt was a profound sense of weary inevitability, mingled with a spark of something else. Something dangerous and confusing that felt terrifyingly like hope. Or maybe just attraction, amplified by the shared intensity, the forced intimacy. Whatever it was, running suddenly seemed like the last thing he wanted to do. They established a temporary camp on the relatively dry patch of ground beneath the mangrove roots. Lyravanya used her strange energy manipulation to coax a small, contained fire from damp wood, its heat a welcome contrast to the swamp's chill. Kalen tried not to watch her too closely as she moved, the memory of her desperate plea, the feel of her lips against his wrist, still vividly imprinted on his senses. The dynamic between them had shifted irrevocably. The biological imperative was out in the open, a tangible thing hanging in the air, but beneath it something else was stirring, a tentative awareness, a reluctant curiosity. So, Kalen started, poking the fire with a stick. Cathar, what's the deal? You mentioned fractured echelons, lineage, sounds like space opera drama. He tried to keep his tone light, needing normalcy after the intensity of the feeding. Lyravanya settled gracefully on the opposite side of the fire, tucking her long legs beneath her. The firelight flickered across her iridescent scales, casting shifting shadows. My people are ancient, she said, her voice soft, thoughtful. Once we resonated across star systems, harmonizing discordant energies, nurturing nascent life. She paused, a flicker of sadness in her silver eyes. But pride, divergence in philosophy, it led to schism, conflict. The great resonance fractured. And the hunters, Kalen prompted gently. They are purists, she explained, her tone hardening slightly. A faction believing the Cathar must sever all ties with lesser species, cleanse our bloodlines of perceived weakness, reclaim dominance through force. She gestured vaguely at herself. My lineage represents a different path, integration, adaptation. They see my potential connection to other species, my ability to form resonant bonds outside our own kind as a threat, a perversion. And now, Kalen said grimly, you formed a resonant bond with a lesser species primate who you accidentally turned into your personal blood bank. They'd love that. A faint smile touched her lips again, fleeting but genuine this time. Your assessment, while crude, is accurate. This bond makes me both a greater prize and a greater abomination in their eyes. The ruby undertones in her light deepened slightly, a reminder of the connection thrumming beneath the surface. They cannot know. Yeah, got it, secrecy, survival. He tossed the stick into the fire, watching the sparks fly. So, what's your plan, assuming we don't get eaten by swamp monsters or captured by purist fanatics? Reach a neutral system, she said promptly. Port Xylos on the cerulean fringe. There are contacts there, allies of my bloodline who can arrange safe passage to a hidden enclave. Port Xylos, Kalen whistled softly. That's halfway across the sector. We're stuck on this mudball with no ship, no comms, and a pack of homicidal traditionalists on our tail. Your ship contained rudimentary distress beacon components, Lyravanya countered. Damaged, but potentially repairable. And the purest shuttle that landed, its communication array might be salvageable if we can locate their temporary landing zone. Kalen stared at her. You want us to sneak into the camp of the people hunting us and steal their radio? It is the most logical recourse, she stated calmly, as if suggesting a stroll through a park. Logical, it's suicidal. Risk assessment indicates a moderate chance of success if executed with precision and stealth, she replied, the analytical queen resurfacing. Your technical skills combined with my sensory capabilities. My technical skills are mostly for fixing leaky coolant lines and bypassing docking fees, not spec ops infiltration, Kalen protested. And your sensory capabilities didn't stop them finding us twice already. Her gaze sharpened. My senses were preoccupied, overwhelmed by the adaptation. The ruby light flared briefly, defensively. Now that equilibrium is temporarily restored, my perception is clearer. He sighed, running a hand through his already messy hair. It was insane, completely, certifiably insane. But it was a plan. A desperate, borderline suicidal plan, but better than just waiting here to be found or for Lyravanya to need another reinforcement. He looked at her, sitting poised and regal even in the dirt, the firelight dancing in her silver eyes. There was a strength in her, a determination that went beyond mere survival instinct. She wasn't just running, she was fighting to get back to something, to somewhere. "Okay," he said slowly. "Okay, let's say we try this crazy plan. We find their ship, we sneak in, I try to MacGyver their comms or swipe a beacon. You stand guard with your spooky resonance thing. What happens if we get caught?" Lyra Vanya's expression became deadly serious. The light within her cooled, sharpening into icy blues. "We do not get caught, Kaelin." Her voice was quiet but held an unmistakable edge of steel. "Failure is not an option for either of us." He met her gaze across the flickering flames. The shared danger, the forced reliance, the strange intimacy of the blood bond, it forged a connection between them, fragile but undeniable. He wasn't just her unwilling donor anymore, he was her partner in this insane gamble. Her survival was tied to his, and maybe, just maybe, his was tied to hers too. He nodded slowly. "Right, no getting caught." The swamp seemed a little less threatening, the future a little less bleak. Still terrifying, still utterly unpredictable, but now they had a direction. And somehow, facing the impossible together felt marginally better than facing it alone. They moved under the cover of the triple moons, casting long, eerie shadows across the swamp. Lyra Vanya led the way, her internal light dimmed to a bare minimum, a faint silver-blue glow that barely disturbed the darkness. Kaelin followed close behind, his salvaged multi-tool in hand, senses on high alert. Lyra Vanya paused frequently, head tilted, tendrils quivering almost imperceptibly. "Their energy signature is faint, shielded," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper above the chirr of nocturnal insects. "But localized, approximately 3 clicks northeast, near the geothermal vents." "Geothermal vents, great place for a secret landing," Kaelin muttered sarcastically. "Nothing like advertising your position with plumes of steam." "The heat masks residual engine signatures," she countered without turning. "Standard evasion tactic." They pressed on, wading through knee-deep, lukewarm water that smelled faintly of sulfur, pushing aside thick, rubbery leaves. Kaelin kept glancing at Lyra Vanya. Even dimmed, her form was captivating, moving with an alien grace that made the treacherous terrain look easy. He remembered the feel of her resonance, the intensity in her eyes during the feeding. He rubbed his wrist absently, the too small marks a constant reminder of their connection. Was she feeling the pull already? Was he imagining the faint ruby undertone that seemed to pulse beneath the blue, growing stronger as they moved deeper into the night? As they neared the geothermal area, the air grew warmer, thicker with steam that drifted between the glowing trees like spectral shrouds. The ground vibrated faintly. Lyra Vanya held up a hand, signaling him to stop. She crouched low, her tendrils spreading out slightly, sampling the air currents. "2 perimeter patrols," she whispered, her voice tight. "Cathar, standard biosignatures, armed." Kaelin's heart hammered against his ribs. "Where?" "Circling the landing zone. Their shuttle is concealed within a dense cluster of psychic analogs, shielded by the largest steam vent." She pointed towards a thick plume rising about 200 meters ahead. "We need to bypass the patrols." "Bypass how?" Kaelin whispered back, peering into the swirling mist. He couldn't see anything beyond vague shapes and shadows. Lyra Vanya turned to him, her silver eyes gleaming faintly in the gloom. "Distraction. You create a diversion on the western flank. A sudden noise, a simulated energy discharge using your tool's short-range emitter. Draw them away. I will use the opportunity to approach the shuttle from the east." "Me, create a diversion, while you stroll over to the enemy ship." "My stealth capabilities exceed yours," she stated flatly. "And your technology, while primitive, can generate the necessary burst to trigger their sensors." He didn't like it, splitting up felt wrong, especially now, but he saw the logic. He was noisy, clumsy, she was not. "Fine," he conceded reluctantly. "But if things go sideways, you get out. Understand, don't wait for me." A flicker of something, surprise, concern, crossed her face. My objective is the communication array, Kalen, our objective. Yeah, well, my objective is not getting vaporized. Just be careful. He squeezed past her, moving towards the west, trying to emulate her silent tread but mostly just squelching through mud. He found a relatively dense patch of vegetation overlooking the area Lyravania had indicated. He could just make out the dark, angular shape of the shuttle through the swirling steam. He took a deep breath, fiddled with his multi-tool settings, preparing a wideband M-pulse. He glanced back towards where Lyravania had been, but she had already vanished into the mist like a phantom. Trust. He had to trust her. He triggered the pulse. A sharp whine cut through the night, followed by a crackle of static that made the air buzz. Kalen ducked down immediately, hopping. It sounded convincingly like weapon discharge or equipment malfunction. Shouted commands, clipped and harsh in the Cathar tongue, echoed through the steam. He saw two tall figures, vaguely illuminated by their own internal lights, colder, harsher blues than Lyravania's, moving quickly towards his position. It worked. They were drawn away from the shuttle. He waited, heart pounding, counting the seconds. He peered towards the shuttle. Had Lyravania made it? Was she inside? The steam shifted, offering fleeting glimpses. Nothing. Then a faint flicker of softer light near the shuttle's rear hatch. Her. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Suddenly, a third Cathar figure emerged from the steam near the shuttle, turning sharply towards the hatch. This one glowed with a more intense, almost violet light. It hadn't gone towards the diversion. It must have been closer, maybe inside the ship. It raised a weapon, a sleek, dark rifle. "Lyra!" Kalen yelled instinctively, forgetting stealth, forgetting everything but the immediate danger to her. He burst from cover, scrambling towards the shuttle, waving his multi-tool uselessly. The violet Cathar whirled towards the sound, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Lyravania needed. She exploded from the shuttle's shadow, not with energy blasts but with sheer physical speed and precision. She slammed into the guard, knocking the rifle aside. They grappled, a blur of blue and violet light tumbling in the mud and steam. Kalen sprinted closer, uselessly trying to help, as the two Cathar he diverted doubled back, alerted by his shout and the sounds of struggle. Lyravania fought with a savage grace, using her agility and strength to counter the larger purist, but the other two were closing fast. Kalen saw the violet Cathar land a blow, sending Lyravania stumbling back. Her light flickered violently, crimson flaring beneath the blue. She looked towards Kalen, her eyes wide with desperation, not for herself, but for him, trapped between the closing guards. Then she did something unexpected. She threw her head back and unleashed a sound, not a word, but a pure, resonant frequency, a wave of sonic energy that hit the attacking Cathar like a physical blow. They staggered, clutching their heads, their internal lights flickering erratically. It also hit Kalen, a disorienting pressure in his ears, making the world tilt. "Oh," Lyravania screamed at him, shoving something small and metallic into his hand, a data chip. "The comm logs, go now." She turned back to face the recovering purists, planting herself between them and Kalen, her own light flaring defensively, laced with protective fury. The ruby resonance pulsed strongly now, a beacon of defiance in the swirling steam. She wasn't just royalty, she was a warrior protecting her. What? Her asset, her ally, her Kalen. He didn't have time to analyze it. He turned and ran, clutching the chip, the sound of her resonant cry still echoing in his ears. The image of her standing against three armed enemies burned into his mind. He ran, not just for his own survival, but because she had commanded it, sacrificed her own escape for his. And the weight of that sacrifice felt heavier than any fear. Kalen didn't stop running until the sounds of the fight faded behind him, swallowed by the swamp and the oppressive humidity. He scrambled back towards their makeshift camp, lungs burning, legs aching, the stolen data chip clutched tightly in his fist. Guilt gnawed at him. He'd left her. He'd followed her order, yes, but he'd left her facing three purists alone. What if they overpowered her? What if her resonant cry wasn't enough? He burst back into the small clearing beneath the mangrove roots, expecting it to be empty. But she was there. Lyravania sat by the rekindled fire, tending to a scorch mark on her arm. Her breathing was slightly ragged, her internal light pulsing a complex mix of blues, greens, and a strong, steady ruby that seemed warmer now, less frantic than before the feeding. She looked up as he stumbled into the firelight, relief washing over her features, quickly masked by her usual regal composure. "Kalen," she said, her voice calm though he detected an underlying tremor, "you secured the data. It wasn't a question." He collapsed onto the ground opposite her, catching his breath. "Yeah," he gasped, holding up the chip. "But how did you? There were 3 of them." "My resonant frequency disrupted their neural pathways temporarily," she explained, examining her arm. "Disorientation, momentary paralysis, sufficient time for tactical withdrawal." She met his gaze, a hint of vulnerability in her silver eyes. "Your warning, it prevented a critical hit." "You saved my ass back there," Kalen countered, shaking his head. "You pushed the chip at me, told me to run. You stayed." The ruby light in her deepened, swirling warmly. "Protecting the mission parameters is paramount. Your survival ensures the data's survival." She looked away, focusing on the fire. "And your survival is linked to mine." He stared at her, the unspoken implications hanging heavy in the air. Linked by blood, yes. But this felt different. She'd actively chosen to protect him, putting herself at greater risk. He looked at the data chip in his hand. Comm logs. Maybe information on the Purist's plans, their numbers, maybe even a way off this rock. "Let's see what we've got," he said, pulling his battered datapad from his pack. Its screen flickered uncertainly, low on power, but it worked. He carefully inserted the chip. Files began to load, encrypted Cathar script, complex navigation logs, personnel rosters. It would take time to decrypt, even with his skills. Lyravania leaned forward slightly, watching the screen, her tendrils twitching with interest. "Their communication protocols are complex, multi-layered encryption." "Yeah, well, I've bypassed worse." He started working, fingers flying across the touch screen, running decryption algorithms, searching for keywords, port xylos. "Extraction," Lyravania. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the churr of the swamp. The forced proximity felt different now. Less tense, more companionable. Shared danger, shared purpose. He risked a glance at her. She was watching his hands move over the datapad, her expression thoughtful. The ruby glow was still present, a soft undercurrent to her usual blue-green light, a constant reminder of the bond between them. It wasn't just a biological dependency anymore. It was a shared frequency, humming just beneath the surface. "Found something," he murmured after a while. "Intercepted transmission. Encrypted, but the header mentions asset retrieval, priority alpha. Coordinates match this system." He frowned. "And there's a sub-frequency tag I don't recognize, not standard Cathar military." Lyravania leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his as she peered at the screen. He felt that familiar jolt, but weaker this time, less alarming, more like a warm hum. She didn't pull away. "That tag," she breathed, her eyes widening slightly. "It belongs to the Xylos Collective, mercenaries, hired guns." "Mercenaries? Why would the Purists hire mercs?" Kalen asked, confused. "Perhaps they seek plausible deniability," Lyravania speculated, her brow furrowed. "Or perhaps the asset is not me." She pointed to a timestamp on the transmission. "This arrived just before we did. They could be targeting someone or something else on this moon." "Something else worth priority alpha retrieval." Kalen ran another search, cross-referencing the coordinates with geological surveys from his ship's database. The coordinates point towards the old ruins, Sector Gamma 7, supposedly abandoned pre-colonial structures. "The Shrine of Whispers," Lyravania murmured, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Ancient texts refer to it, a place of powerful resonant convergence. Perhaps a Cathar artifact is hidden there, something the Purists seek to control or destroy." "Or something the mercs want to steal," Kalen added grimly. "Great. So we have Purists hunting us and possibly professional mercenaries hunting some powerful space junk, all converging on the same creepy ruins." He scrubbed a hand over his face. This just keeps getting better. Lyra Vanya looked at him, her expression serious. If there is a powerful artifact there, Kaelin, it could be dangerous in purest hands, or mercenary hands, and it might possess resonant frequencies strong enough to, she hesitated. Strong enough to what? He prompted. Interfere with your condition, help it. Possibly, she admitted softly, or disrupt it entirely. The resonance could potentially sever the bond. Sever the bond. The words hung in the air. Freedom for him, stability, maybe even a cure for her. It was what he should want, what they both should want. But the thought sent a strange, unexpected pang through him. He looked at Lyra Vanya, at the complex light swirling within her, the ruby thread woven through the blue and green. He thought of her fighting for him, of the strange intimacy they'd shared. Severing the bond suddenly didn't feel like the straightforward solution it should have been. It felt like loss. He pushed the feeling down, uncomfortable with its implications. Right, he said, forcing practicality into his voice. So ruins, artifact, maybe a way out, maybe a way to fix this. He looked at her, meeting her silver gaze directly. Looks like we're going to the Shrine of Whispers. The Shrine of Whispers lived up to its name. Ancient, cyclopean structures of obsidian-like rock loomed out of the mist-choked jungle, half swallowed by glowing vines and colossal tree roots. A low, almost subliminal hum vibrated in the air, resonating deep within Kaelin's bones. Strange sigils, faintly luminous, pulsed rhythmically on the weathered stone surfaces. It felt old, powerful, unsettling. Lyra Vanya moved through the ruins with a reverence Kaelin hadn't seen before. Her internal light shifted, becoming brighter, more vibrant, swirling with complex patterns of gold, silver, and the ever-present ruby. Her tendrils quivered constantly, sampling the resonant energies saturating the air. This place, she breathed, awe in her voice. The resonance is immense, primal. She touched a pulsing sigil on a massive archway. The light flared beneath her fingers, sending ripples of energy across the stone. Cathar, pre-schism, built to channel and amplify cosmic harmonies. Cosmic harmonies or big trouble, Kaelin muttered, scanning the shadowed colonnades and crumbling plazas with his multi-tools limited sensor sweep. Any sign of our purest friends, or the mercs? Multiple energy signatures, Lyra Vanya confirmed, her expression tightening. Faint, dispersed, they are here, searching. She looked at him, her silver eyes intense. And the central convergence point, the artifact, its resonance signature is incredibly strong, almost overwhelming. She pressed a hand to her chest, where the ruby light pulsed steadily. It calls to mind to our bond, Kaelin, pulls at it. He felt it too, a strange thrumming sensation centered in his chest, echoing the feeling he got when Lyra Vanya was close, but amplified, distorted. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was deeply weird. So, what do we do? Try to grab the space doodad before they do. Try to use it to sever the connection. The words felt strange on his tongue now, hesitant. Lyra Vanya looked torn. Acquiring the artifact could give us leverage, perhaps even aid our escape. Its power, it could potentially recalibrate my energy matrix, negate the dependency. She paused, her gaze searching his face. But the energy surge required, it could be dangerous, unpredictable for both of us. He met her look, understanding the unspoken question. This wasn't just about her survival anymore. It was about their survival, their connection. Severing it might free him, might cure her, but it felt like breaking something essential, something forged in shared danger and forced intimacy. He thought of the alternative, staying bonded, needing periodic, intimate transfers, always hunted, always dependent. It was a terrifying prospect, but the thought of losing the connection, losing her, was surprisingly worse. Let's focus on finding it first, Kaelin decided, making a choice without fully understanding why. See what it is, then we figure out what to do with it, and maybe try not to get shot by fanatics or mercs in the process. Lyra Vanya nodded slowly, a flicker of relief in her eyes. Agreed. The strongest resonance emanates from the central spire. She pointed towards a towering, needle-like structure partially collapsed but still dominating the ruins. We proceed with caution. They moved deeper into the complex, sticking to the shadows, senses hyper-alert. The air grew thicker with resonant energy, making Kalen's teeth hum and his skin prickle. Lyravania seemed to draw strength from it, her movements becoming more fluid, her light brighter, yet the ruby core pulsed with a growing intensity that mirrored the thrumming in Kalen's own chest. The bond was reacting to the shrine's power, tightening, resonating. They reached the base of the central spire. A single, massive stone door, covered in swirling, luminous Cathar script, blocked the entrance. It pulsed with contained energy. Locked, Kalen observed unnecessarily. Got a key. It requires a resonant key, Lyravania murmured, stepping closer. A specific harmonic frequency. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the glowing script. Her own light surged, matching the patterns on the door. The ruby hue flared, becoming almost dominant. Kalen felt a sharp pull in his chest, mirroring her effort. She gasped, stumbling back slightly. The lock requires a dual resonance, harmonized. Dual, Kalen frowned, like two Cathar. Or, Lyravania looked at him, her eyes wide, filled with dawning realization and something akin to fear. Or a bonded pair, resonating together. Before Kalen could process the implications, blaster fire erupted from the upper levels of the spire. Bolts of plasma seared the air, impacting the stone near them. Figures appeared in the crumbling archways above, the angular shapes of purest armor, glowing with cold blue light. "Ambush!" Kalen yelled, grabbing Lyravania's arm and pulling her behind a massive, overturned pillar. More figures emerged from the surrounding ruins, these ones clad in heavier, non-luminous combat gear. Mercenaries. They were caught in a three-way firefight. "The artifact!" Lyravania shouted over the din of battle. "They know we need to get inside." "How? You said it needs both of us," Kalen yelled back, firing blindly with his multi-tool's weak energy pulse setting, more for cover than effect. "Our bond," she insisted, her eyes locking with his, filled with desperate urgency. The ruby light pulsed frantically within her, a beacon in the chaotic flashing of blaster fire. "Focus on it, Kalen. Resonate with me. Now." He stared at her, panic warring with a strange sense of clarity. Resonate. Feel the connection. The pull. He closed his eyes, shutting out the chaos, focusing inward on the thrumming sensation in his chest, the echo of her presence intertwined with his own essence. He reached for it, embraced it, pushed his own intention towards her, towards the door. Lyravania grasped his hand, her cool skin searing against his. He felt the jolt, stronger than ever before, a surge of shared energy, blue and ruby light swirling together, arcing between them. He felt her need, her strength, her fear, her resolve, all crashing through him. And he met it with his own, his fear, his desperation, his surprising, fierce desire to protect her, to connect. Together they turned towards the door, still clasping hands, pouring their combined will, their shared resonance into the ancient lock. The sigils on the door flared blindingly bright, the hum rising to an almost unbearable pitch. And then, with a deep, grinding groan that shook the very foundations of the spire, the massive stone door began to slide open. Inside, bathed in an ethereal glow, pulsed the artifact. And Kalen knew with chilling certainty that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The chamber inside the spire was vast, circular, and pulsed with breathtaking power. In the center, floating above a crystalline pedestal, hovered the artifact. It wasn't stone or metal, but pure, solidified resonance, a swirling vortex of light and energy, shifting through impossible colors, emitting a low, harmonic chime that vibrated through Kalen's very soul. The pull on the bond between him and Lyravania intensified exponentially, a tangible force drawing them towards the artifact's core. Blaster fire continued outside, the sound slightly muffled by the thick stone walls. They didn't have much time. Purists and mercs would be pouring in soon. "What is it?" Kalen breathed, mesmerized by the swirling light. "The Heartstone," Lyravania whispered, her voice filled with awe. "A nexus of cosmic harmony, older than the schism. It amplifies resonance, purifies it." Her gaze was fixed on the heartstone, but her hand tightened its grip on his. The ruby light within her pulsed in time with the artifact's core rhythm. Amplify, purify, Kalen looked from the artifact to her. Can it fix you without, he couldn't finish the sentence, without breaking us apart? Lyravania tore her gaze from the heartstone, looking at him. Conflict warred in her silver eyes. Its energy is immense, Kalen. It could potentially stabilize my matrix permanently, integrating your unique frequency without the need for physical transfer. Relief surged through him, potent and immediate. She wouldn't need his blood anymore. But then her expression clouded. Or, she continued softly, the purification protocols might perceive our bond, forced by the aberrant blood integration, as discordant. It could sever it violently. The feedback could be catastrophic, for both of us. Freedom versus potential oblivion. Stability versus the unknown. He looked at their joined hands, felt the powerful current flowing between them, amplified by the heartstone's proximity. Severing the bond now felt unthinkable, like tearing out a part of himself. There has to be another way, he insisted, his voice tight. Maybe we don't use it on you. Maybe we just use its energy, redirect it, create a pulse to knock out the purists and mercs, buy us time to escape. Lyravania considered this, her tendrils analyzing the artifact's energy field. Theoretically possible, it would require immense focus, precise modulation, and we would need to channel the energy together through our bond. Heavy footsteps echoed from the entrance tunnel, shouts in Cathar and harsh mercenary commands. They were coming. Okay, Kalen said decisively, turning her to face him, gripping both her hands now. Forget severing, forget fixing. Survival, together. Let's give them a light show they won't forget. A fierce smile touched Lyravania's lips, transforming her face. It was dazzling, predatory, and utterly captivating. Together, she agreed, her silver eyes blazing with shared resolve. The ruby light within her surged, intertwining fully with the blue and gold, reflecting the swirling colors of the heartstone. They turned back to the artifact, raising their joined hands. Focusing their combined will, their amplified resonance, they reached out towards the swirling vortex of energy. Kalen felt the power surge into them, an overwhelming torrent of light and sound and pure, raw energy, filtered and focused through the unique frequency of their bond. It was exhilarating, terrifying. He felt Lyravania beside him, her strength bolstering his, their minds linked in a way that transcended words. The chamber filled with blinding light. The harmonic chime of the heartstone rose to a deafening crescendo. Kalen felt the energy build within them, straining against their control, threatening to tear them apart. But the bond held. Strengthened by choice, by shared purpose, it became a conduit, shaping the raw power. With a shared mental command, they unleashed it. Not inward, not at each other, but outward. A wave of pure, non-lethal, resonant energy exploded from the spire, washing over the ruins. Kalen felt it ripple through the stone, heard the cries of surprise and pain from outside, saw through the open doorway the flickering lights of Cathar armor and mercenary suits shorting out, weapons clattering to the ground as soldiers collapsed, stunned and disoriented. Silence fell, broken only by the gentle, fatting chime of the heartstone and the ragged sound of their own breathing. The intense light subsided, leaving Kalen dizzy, drained but exhilarated. Lyravania swayed beside him, her internal light flickering softly, the ruby glow warm and steady. He instinctively wrapped an arm around her waist to support her, pulling her close. She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder for a moment. A gesture of trust that sent a jolt of warmth through him, stronger than any bioelectric feedback. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "They are incapacitated," she confirmed, lifting her head. Her silver eyes met his, luminous in the artifact's soft glow. The raw power, the shared intimacy of wielding the heartstone together had stripped away their remaining barriers. He saw no queen, no alien predator, just Lyravania, vulnerable, strong, beautiful, and inextricably bound to him. Temporarily. "Then let's get out of here," he urged, keeping his arm around her, before they wake up with headaches and bad attitudes. They turned away from the Heartstone, leaving its mystery and power behind. As they stepped out of the spire into the now quiet ruins, littered with stunned purists and mercenaries, Kalen knew their journey was far from over. They still needed to get off this moon, still had enemies, and Lyravanya's condition, though perhaps manageable now without the constant desperate need, was still a part of their reality. But something fundamental had shifted. The bond, once a source of fear and obligation, now felt like potential, a connection forged in chaos, deepened by choice and tested by fire. He looked down at Lyravanya leaning against him, her light pulsing softly in rhythm with his own unsteady heartbeat. Their future was uncertain, dangerous, bound by a need that might never fully disappear, but facing it together, that no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like a beginning. He tightened his arm around her and she leaned into him, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They walked out of the shrine of whispers, not as captive and captor, not as human and alien, but as two souls linked by blood, resonance, and the terrifying, exhilarating promise of a shared destiny.